So sit back, relax, and give us a go. Scott and Matt and maybe a guest have undertaken an epic pod quest. We're gonna ramble on about movies and books and television and film festivals and directors and all this other stuff that I really know nothing about because they made this really long list of things that they want to talk about and I can't even read through all of them, but it's gonna be great. Okay, start the show.
Hello and welcome to the Daly Planet Podcast, your daily dose of all things movies, TV, books, and anything else we feel like talking about. My name is Scott Daly, editor-in-chief of DailyPlanetFilms.com, and I'm joined as always by my co-host and co-editor, Matt Freeman. Matt, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Buried under about 2 feet of snow, and excited to talk about the entirety of Wool with you guys.
Man, snow already? It just got cold here like today for the first time.
This is our second noteworthy snow of the year, actually, and we couldn't even get out of the driveway.
Wow.
Where do you live, Denver?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not moving there.
That's crazy.
It's pretty fun.
As you listeners can hear, we are joined by special guest Cyndee Daly once again. Thanks for coming, Cyndee. We're here to talk about, like Matt said, the last section of Wool and the book as a whole. And since Cyndee was here for the first section, we thought it'd be a good idea to have her back. So I can't wait to get into Wool. We got a lot of good questions to go over, some great discussions to have, I think. Before we jumped into that, though, I wanted to quickly go over the news and some recommendations from the group. The only big news item I had is something that dropped yesterday that I almost couldn't believe. It's kind of fitting because our very first podcast was talking about Christopher Nolan and one of the movies that we mentioned as my favorite, and I think, Matt, it was your favorite of Nolan's film too, was Memento. Well, I guess someone decided that this movie needed a reboot, and it's been greenlit, a $200 million reboot of Memento, which I don't know how you make Memento and spend $200 million. But they're going to do it. 15 years after the first movie, they're going to.
Is Christopher Nolan going to do it again?
Nope.
Why would they do that?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the worst idea I've ever heard.
It really is. I mean, it's like, I don't know. I mean, obviously, movies are a business and they want to make money and they feel they can make money. But if you've seen Memento, you don't want to see a different version of Memento. If you haven't seen Memento, just go see that movie. It's not like it's hard to see. It's not hard to find. It's everywhere. Like, and you know what they're probably going to do is they're probably going to make it linear. Like they're gonna say, oh, that backwards time thing is too confusing for viewers, so we're just gonna completely ruin that.
That misses the whole point.
Yeah. They're gonna take everything away that made it stylistically special, and just it's gonna be shameful. What's saddest is that they're probably gonna make a ton of money with it because they wouldn't have. I feel like they wouldn't have even greenlit it if they hadn't sort of done their homework and determined that people would go see it anyway. Because I feel like there's a population of people who are going to say, "What a stupid idea! Who would remake Memento?" And then when it's in theaters, they're going to go see it.
Yeah, I think you're right. So. I will not. I refuse. I would rather go see the Die Hard prequel than a reboot of Memento.
Yeah,
that's ridiculous. I hope everyone out there agrees. If you haven't seen Memento, go see that movie. Don't waste your time with this remake. There's like no word on who's going to be in it, who's directing, when it's coming out, but we know it's happening. Hopefully they'll have seen the terrible backlash from this and decide that it's not a good idea.
Yeah, I'm sure they're listening to our podcast.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. If you're listening, do not make this movie. Don't do it. Just put the old one in theaters again.
Yeah.
And that Memento was a movie, I haven't looked it up, but there's no way it was more than like a $30 million movie. So how do you spend 200? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, I don't know. Inflation.
Yeah, of course. 15 years.
Yeah.
I actually read this funny story that talked about how one of Chris Nolan's first movie was Insomnia, which is actually a remake of a movie that had just come out like a decade before and didn't need a remake. So this is kind of like just it being paid forward, that Someone's gonna remake his movie only 15 years removed for no reason.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Yeah. It's just terrible news. But on the flip side of thing, I have discovered, and by discovered I mean read a lot of websites that strongly recommended, a new show that's available on Netflix right now. It's called The 100. It's a CW show, which, if you know anything about those shows, can be a little iffy. And it starts off very typically CW. So the basic premise of the show is that the Earth has killed itself in nuclear war, and there's this space station orbiting the planet that the last remnants of mankind live on. Because they're so limited on resources, like any crime on the spaceship is punishable by death. So if you do anything wrong, you're dead. Except if you're under 18, then they like just throw you in prison, and once you're 18, like they examine your case again, and if you're worthy of surviving, they let you do so. But the show starts out with basically the Ark, which is the space station, is finally dying. It's been like 100 years since the Earth has been killed. So they're in a last-ditch effort to try to save it. They send 100 of the under 18 prisoners down to Earth, just like basically check out if it's hospitable or not, and if so, in a few months, the rest of the Ark will land. So they land, and they find out that Earth is habitable, and then it's kind of the adventures from there. And it like, as I say it, and probably as you're listening to it, it sounds like really like typical CW like YA kind of garbage.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm staring at my signed copy of Neil Stephenson's Seven Eves right now, as you're describing the plot of it to me.
So I haven't read that book, so I don't know. And this is based off a novel too. Honestly, you know, for a lot of parts, I mean, there's like the love triangles and all this other stuff. But the crazy thing about the show is that it gets really, really interesting at about the third episode. It takes some turns and does some stuff and deals with like actual like strong moral issues. And it's not afraid to tackle them and explore them in really interesting ways. I heard one of the reviews of this, the review that got my attention, called this kind of like the perfect follow-up to Battlestar Galactica, and that it's this sci-fi story like that is not afraid to delve into deep, complicated themes. And after like the first two episodes were a little rough to get through, but after that, I really agree with that. And I'm about 6 or 7 episodes in. There's 2 seasons on Netflix, and another is playing right now. And I'm really enjoying it. It's really good. So okay. I would recommend you at least check it out and get through 3 episodes before you make up your mind. If you liked Battlestar Galactica at all, I think you'll like it.
Yeah, it sounds like my kind of thing. It's sci-fi and it's on Netflix. So
yeah.
Check it out.
Check it out, and then let us know what you think. I'm being really interested to hear your opinion on it. All right, Matt, did you have anything you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I'm going to continue my trend of talking about 20-year-old movies that I just saw again recently because I rewatched The Mask of Zorro with Antonio Banderas, which I hadn't seen in a very long time, and I was sort of apprehensive because I didn't think it would hold up. I didn't think I would like it, because I sort of thought of it as a movie of my childhood. But I actually still quite enjoyed it. I thought it was very well paced and very well built up toward the climactic duels at the end. And it was just an overall kind of very fun, swashbuckling sword fighting movie, and very, very good at what it was trying to do. So I think it's valuable to sometimes go back and revisit these things. And if people have never seen this movie, even though it's really old, it might be worth a look, just accepting that it's sort of supposed to be a little bit campy.
Yeah, and it's been forever since I've seen this movie, but I think I remember it exactly the way you're describing it. Just like this fun kind of adventure story that it's not really deep, but it does what it wants to do really well. Cyndee, you saw this too, right?
I
think we saw it together because that was when we were still children.
Yeah, I don't really remember much about it. I mean, I vaguely remember watching it, but it was a long time ago.
Because the one thing about this movie I remember is that our viewing of it broke right near the end. Like, there's a giant explosion at the end, and just as the dust is settling, our projector broke.
So did we watch the end? I don't remember that at all.
Years later. Because they were just like, oh, well, it broke. Here's a ticket to see it again. And we were like, I don't want to sit in a theater again just to see the last 5 minutes of the movie. Which makes it sound like it wasn't that good of a movie. But no, it was. It was. I think that's a really good recommendation. I think that's something that you definitely should go back and see. Especially in like a time when nostalgia is such a huge thing. There's some really good movies back there that maybe we ignored the first time around, but and like you, I think Matt, you mentioned that like our theme on this podcast has been the origin story is always the most interesting, and this kind of does the Zorro origin story, but in a twist on it, like a different kind of cool twist.
Yeah, it's sort of like the old Zorro teaching the new Zorro, and he's as the master. It was interesting because my wife had actually never seen this movie, so that's another reason I was apprehensive. Is I was like, oh, I'm going to show her this, and she's going to think this is a stupid, childish movie because I don't remember if it's actually good or if I just thought it was good when I was a stupid child. But she actually enjoyed it as well as I did. So
nice.
So yeah, then I had another. While we're burying everyone in recommendations, there's another podcast which is actually super popular. So my recommendation probably won't accomplish much, but it's called. Actually, I don't remember if it's called Welcome to Night Vale or if it's just called Night Vale.
I think it's Welcome to Night Vale.
Yeah. So Welcome to Night Vale, and it's about it's basically as if you're listening to like a radio news broadcast in this fictional, really weird, supernatural town where there's always totally bizarre things happening, and it's very Lovecraftian if you're familiar with Lovecraft. There's my favorite is just like the first episode where the announcer is like, there's been a new dog park installed. No people or dogs are allowed on the dog park. Do not look directly at the dog park. And it's just that's kind of a sample of the kind of ridiculous things. But it's very enjoyable.
I actually started listening to this very recently too, a recommendation from a friend, and it's really funny. Like, yeah, I really have enjoyed it so far. They're short. They're like 20, 25-minute episodes that I think they do once a week, but they've got like a back catalog of probably 80 of them or something. So I'm still slowly working my way through it. But I agree. I like it a lot. It's kind of like if you lived in the Twilight Zone, what a radio host would be talking about.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. I didn't mention that it's comedic. I made it sound like it was serious, but yeah, it's definitely all tongue in cheek.
Yeah,
it's supposed to be funny.
It's very well done too. It's very well produced, and the guy who does the voice has a really great radio voice.
Yeah, there's also very interesting musical interludes, which I quite enjoy.
Yeah, they call it the weather, don't they?
Yeah, they say, and now for the weather, and then there will be some really interesting song that you've never heard before.
I'll be sad to admit that it took me like 3 times watching 3 episodes before I realized that's what the weather was. Until I actually looked at the show notes on it, and it said weather, and then had the link to the music, and I was like, oh, that's what they're doing.
Yeah, I like it.
It's good, yeah. Everyone should check that out, but listen to this podcast first. Don't.
Yeah.
Cyndee, do you have anything that you wanted to recommend or talk about real quick?
Well, I just wanted to briefly talk about a movie I saw on Amazon Prime called Dark Places, which is based on Gillian Flynn's, I think it was her second book. Gone Girl was her third book, actually. So I read this book last summer in 2014, and I saw there was going to be a movie. I was really excited to watch it. I was kind of annoyed at the casting because Charlize Theron doesn't look anything like the character she's supposed to be playing, but I was really curious to see the movie. And it was supposed to be released in the fall of 2014, actually before Gone Girl, but no trailer came out. We didn't know what was happening. So the theory was, okay, they're just going to wait until after Gone Girl comes out and kind of ride the coattails because it's by the same author. And if Gone Girl makes a lot of money, then they can advertise it as by the same author of Gone Girl. And then nothing happened. The movie just disappeared. I think it came out in Europe over the spring. The director is actually French. And then they sold the American rights to DirecTV, and it came out on DirecTV before it came in theaters. Then it came out in theaters here for like a week, and I wanted to see it, but it was the only time it was playing was like 10 o'clock in the morning. So basically the studio just jettisoned this movie that was by a hugely popular author who just had a very successful movie based on one of her books. And so I was really curious what could have gone wrong here. So I watched the movie, and I didn't think it was that bad. I mean, it wasn't a great movie, but I thought the acting was good. There were a lot of, big name actors, most notably Charlize Theron and Christina Hendricks, Chloe Grace Moretz. And I thought the acting was good. It had a twist like any Gillian Flynn novel does. It was a little more typical thriller plotline, solving a murder. But I thought it was pretty good overall.
Yeah.
And it's free on Amazon Prime, so you can watch it.
Yeah, I actually got to see this on one of my weird sneak preview things through the Film Society here in Dallas. And I think you're right. The weirdest thing about this movie is that no one that owned it seemed to care about it at all. And I mean, I understand, like, it was not a great movie, but you think just off of the name alone, they would have pushed it, and it could have picked up some money. I mean, it's one of those mysteries of the studio system that I don't understand, when they just basically write off a movie and they say, we're not going to get any money off this, so we're not going to invest in any marketing, we're not going to push it to any theaters. Like, I think it was in 2 theaters in Dallas. And part of it was because when they sold it to DirecTV, some of the theaters get really upset when you put stuff on demand before it goes into theater, so they like boycott it and they won't show it in their theaters. It's weird. It's just very weird. Wasn't a bad movie.
No, I mean, you should read the book first. Like, I think the book's better. I usually think the book's better because the book has so much more detail. But it's not a bad movie.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, Amazon instant streaming. If you have a Prime membership, check it out. Speaking of books, let's move on to our main topic of the day. This podcast is all about the second half and Wool as a whole. So we've all finished reading it. We've got some great questions to go over that you guys have submitted. But before we did that, I just wanted to get everyone's just general overall opinion on what you thought of the book as a whole, and maybe the second half more specifically. Cyndee, why don't you go first?
Okay. Well, I was really disappointed when I started the 4th section. I did not find it as compelling as the first 3 sections. And I think it picked up towards the end. I did like the end better. But I don't know. I felt like the character of Knox was not developed as well. We didn't really know much about him. The uprising, it just seemed to come out of nowhere, and it just seemed ridiculous to me. So overall, I liked the book. I thought that the author did a better job of kind of building and creating this world than he did at coming up with conflicts and resolutions for those conflicts.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think one of the big things we talked about the first time was what we thought the whole hidden mystery was. And I guess, Matt, it was kind of exactly what you thought it was going to be.
Oh yeah,
almost literally.
I should take credit for being right about everything.
Yeah, as I was reading this, I was like, did Matt read ahead?
No, and I guess I could even say that is slightly disappointing that I was able to, that you know, it was telegraphed to the extent that it was, or at least I felt that I kind of saw where things were going.
Yeah. So did you and Matt enjoy the book, even being 100% right? Did you like the second half?
I liked some things about it, and then I thought that there were some problems. There were even times where I was like simultaneously enjoying something and annoyed by it. And because that doesn't make any sense, I'm going to have to explain what I mean. Like where she's like running down the stairs in pitch darkness with like apparently like very, very dim green emergency lights every once in a while, and she knows that she's either being chased or she's chasing someone who like just stole her knife. And this scene manages to not be scary or tense somehow. Like that sounds like, just describing it sounds like you could make this, like this is Stephen King material. You're in this totally, isolated silo. You think you're alone. It's pitch dark, and then suddenly someone steals your weapon, and you don't know who they are or where they are or whether they mean you harm. And again, somehow this amazing scenario that was set up, it's like a really compelling scenario, was just almost like a totally wasted opportunity in terms of making me actually, like I had no problem just like putting down the book in the middle of this section, whereas it seems like it should have been utterly riveting. So it's similar to what Cyndee said, actually. It's like he's really good at creating like a scenario. You could even, go macro, so he's really good at creating this whole world, but not quite pulling off what he has set up.
I think that's a really good point, because now that I think about it, I don't think there was ever a point in this book, especially the stuff in Silo 17 with Jules, that I was really in a tense situation, which you think with the plot as the way it unfolded, there should have been. Like, there are plenty of moments where it should be tense, but I never felt it. And I don't know if that's just a dig on the writing or the way everything was set up. But yeah, I never really got that. Like, even when she's in the bottom about to drown, possibly, like I was just always kind of like, she's going to get out of this. Like, and it was just never, I think maybe the writing was just too like matter of fact and laying out what was happening, where you weren't brought into that tension. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's the perfect term is matter of fact. Like it was, in some regards, it used what I think of as like a naturalistic style, where, for example, it'll sort of describe the sensory impressions of a character as they're preparing tea for themselves, and then smelling the tea and drinking the tea, and this is all happening as they're having a conversation. So it's naturalistic in the sense that it's trying to sort of viscerally put you in the position of the characters. But simultaneously, it's almost too literal in how it's trying to be naturalistic. Like it's not propelling you dramatically; it's just being naturalistic, and so it's somewhat empty.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a good way of describing it too. So yeah, I mean, I think the overall trend is we were all kind of disappointed. I think the first 3 sections set up like a good mystery, and we were kind of anxious to see where it was going to go from there. And I thought, very early on in the 4th section, it became clear that the book was not going to go where I thought it was, and was not going to go to an interesting place. And the thing that I think hurt it the most was how we started jumping character perspectives a lot.
I agree with that.
I think the first 3 sections were told mostly from one single character, and then suddenly in the 4th we're jumping around every other chapter between different people. Some of these people we've barely met before, so they haven't had really any time to be characterized, and suddenly we're in their head and we're supposed to care about what's happening to them. Like, there's a lot of times when I read the Game of Thrones novels where they jump around like that. Like, I was frustrated because a chapter would end on one of the characters I really cared about and something was happening to them. But then I would very quickly be absorbed into the next character and kind of forget about my annoyance. That didn't really happen here. Like, I was most interested in what was happening with Jules, and every time it jumped back, I was annoyed. And I remained annoyed throughout that entire section.
Yeah, every time I went to the part with Knox and the guns, I was, like, bored, and I had to force myself through that part.
Yeah, because we don't know who this guy... I mean, we met this guy, like, once, maybe.
And he did not develop him. Like, we know nothing about him even at the end of the section. He was just there to, like, propel the plot.
Right.
The uprising.
They just needed something from the uprising's point of view, which actually Matt and I were discussing this the other day, and I think we kind of landed on the fact that I don't think we needed that point of view at all. Like, we could have just stuck with Jules' perspective and just had her learn what was going on with the uprising through the radio, and it would have accomplished everything it needed to.
Yeah. All you need to know about the uprising is that the uprising fails, and lots of people in the bottom part of the silo are killed, and I mean, I guess I'm just sort of we were sort of jumping around anyway, but I thought that the Lucas subplot or character in general had a lot of potential that I'm not going to say it was wasted, because I enjoyed parts of his story. I enjoyed actually quite a few different, subsections of his story, but it definitely didn't go where I thought it was going to go. So I thought Lucas was going to be a bad guy, even in the last podcast. And I think he should have been a bad guy. I think that would have been a better turn to take. But his temptation to the dark side is never convincing. Like, you never think that he's actually considering it. Even though in the situation he's in, you could sort of understand him being tempted by it, because he's essentially being brainwashed. He's isolated. He's only got this one guy talking to him, and then he's got Jules talking to him, but Jules is sort of beginning to become antagonistic and distant. And I could have totally seen him deciding that, especially after he finds out about Jules's old boyfriend, and he starts to get jealous. I was like, oh, okay, this is it. This is going to be the wedge that turns him, dark side. And it just didn't happen. And I was like, I wonder why didn't it happen? Like, it seemed almost obvious to me that was going to happen. I don't know. Yeah. What did you guys think?
It felt like they were setting up a conflict that never paid off. And I mean, it makes, as you're thinking, I'm thinking of the book as a whole, and I'm thinking about what the main conflict of the story was, which the first section set it up very clearly to be Jules versus Bernard, right?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't actually happen, because from that point on, she's in the other silo. She's dealing with her own problems. And really what's happening with Bernard and Silo 18 are completely divorced from what's happening to her. So they're not really ever in conflict with each other.
Yeah. In fact, Bernard's downfall is basically like he said something you shouldn't say on the radio, and then
that's the whole, like, that's the only thing that happens. Like, nothing really happens in this story now that I think about it, except for that, really. That's the only change of the status quo, is he accidentally says something that the sheriff overhears because he didn't turn his radio all the way down.
Yeah, right.
It's nothing Lucas does on his own. So neither of the protagonists really do anything.
Yeah, they're just, the first two protagonists, if you will, are killed, and then the third one is sort of successfully banished, and yeah, I agree with your assessment that it doesn't quite cohere.
And her survival is what sets forth the events in the next two sections, but her survival was not because of her. Like, it was for her, but she wasn't active in it.
Yeah.
So that's yeah. I mean, I think it's funny that none of this occurred to me, and as we're talking, the problems with the book become a little more glaring. But I don't want to be just mean to it, because actually there were parts I did very much like. But I wanted to jump into. We've just kind of been talking overall. I wanted to jump into some of the questions that we got, and I think these will spur on some additional discussion that I think will be good. The first question we got is, how did IT find out about the uprising so that they were prepared for the attack? Cyndee, what did you think about this one? I think I know the answer, but
well, it says in that book that if a cleaning fails, prepare for war. So Bernard was just following the order in the book. The theory is that if the cleaning fails, then people are going to be mad because it upsets the whole world order and upsets the social controls, and they're just going to attack, which I don't necessarily agree with that. Like, it seems
very
like
presumptuous, right?
Yeah. And I don't know.
Yeah, it's almost like it just happened to be correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that brings us to another question we got, which is, what are your thoughts on the uprising in general? Because that seemed, I think Cyndee touched on it briefly, but it seemed very forced, like it was happening because the story needed it to. And I never really felt why it was happening. Like, these are people, They spent 3 sections, like, people are terrified to even mention outside, and then one person makes it over a hill, and suddenly we're picking up arms and making guns.
Yeah, I actually thought this whole plotline was just ridiculous, and it was really, really disappointing to me. Because, first of all, like, the whole concept that these people the last uprising was a long time ago, nobody remembers it, it's all been erased, but somehow these people know how to make guns and know how to use guns. And, Knox mentions he's only seen a gun that the sheriff carried, like, he's never used one. He doesn't know anything about it, but somehow they're making guns and they're using guns and they're shooting people, and it just seems stupid. And it would have made a lot more sense if it was some kind of covert thing, and that would have been a lot more interesting to me personally. It's like somehow trying to take IT down from within or something like that. Sorry, Matt, what were you saying?
Oh, that's fine. I was just going to say, I sort of feel like defending what this could have been or what it could have been trying to do, even though I don't know if it pulled it off, which is, as I was reading it, I got this idea of these people don't really have history. Like we have this long history. We know about the bloodshed of humankind. We know what we're capable of. And so we simultaneously sort of instinctively and just through how we were raised know how to go about inflicting horrible violence. And we also know why we shouldn't do that, because it always just results in like a multi-sided bloodbath for everyone. So, to reiterate, we all sort of know how to go about conducting a guerrilla war just because we watch the news, and we all know why we shouldn't do that just because we watch the news. But in this society, they don't have that advantage, so they have all of sort of the impulsiveness and bloody-mindedness of human nature, but they don't have history to contextualize that for them. So that allows me to sort of believe or maybe suspend my disbelief and say maybe they are so naive that they're just like, oh, okay, well, I don't like this. I'm going to build guns and I'm going to go threaten these people, and this is all going to work out somehow, because they've never read history and they don't know that never works out.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think that's very possible, but I think that the novel doesn't set that up very well.
Yeah.
No.
I think it seems very rushed, which is weird considering it was, I mean, the first section was not even half the first 3 sections that we read the first time around were not even half the novel. So this was over half the novel talking about this uprising, which was really the main action set piece that just didn't work at all. And then like the second part of the question I read was, did it accomplish anything? And really, no. This was the big action set piece, the big turn of the book, and it was ultimately pointless. Because maybe what happens with Jules, again, is completely independent from the uprising itself. And actually, there was that whole part about how they're trying to fix the radio so that they could talk to Jules. Did that I mean, I can't remember. Maybe I'm forgetting. Did that matter at all? Did anything get accomplished through that? So they could talk to her?
She told them to stop doing
Yeah,
the
but they
gas thing,
didn't.
but I don't think it worked.
But they didn't. They
Yeah.
were already at that point. They were already about to be overrun and killed.
Yeah, yeah. All that was accomplished was that she was able to have a conversation with Bernard on the radio that was then overheard.
Oh yeah, that's
so
true.
If they hadn't figured out how to talk,
Yeah.
Well, but that was her just messing with the radio on her end.
Yeah.
That had nothing to do with Walter messing with the radio on his end. There's this, like, they spent probably 50 pages talking about him trying to fix this radio, and there's a character we had never spent any time with running for her life to get a piece of the radio to fix it, and that's completely pointless.
Yeah.
I think first drafty is an adjective I could use for a lot of this. There's a lot of good ideas here, but it just wasn't tightened up into a good story. And maybe, like, I think, was this a book that was first published online?
Yes.
Okay, so that actually makes a lot of sense to me, because it feels like it needs editing and tightening of the story.
Yeah, not just the story, but also the prose feels kind of workmanlike is a word.
Which is, it's a good point, but it's weird because the first time around, the first section, I was complimenting the author's prose on how they describe some stuff and the detail, and maybe I just stopped paying attention, but I felt like the second half of the book didn't really spend as much time on this flowery descriptive language of things.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely agree with you. I don't think it did.
Yeah.
There were some jarring stylistic changes. I mean, one that really jumped out at me, which may have been intentional, it very well could be intentional, is that the characters started swearing all the time suddenly.
I didn't notice that.
And that did coincide with, like, things getting violent and the uprising starting, but, like, no one swore prior to basically the moment when they started talking about the uprising, and then suddenly everyone's talking about rat shit is their epithet that they use.
Actually, now that you say that, that's really Bernard in particular swore a lot in the second half of the book, and it was jarring to me every time I read it, and I didn't realize why, and I think it is precisely because what you said is because before that there really was none of it, and all of a sudden he's saying just about every cuss word in the book.
Yeah. I don't want to be too hard on that because that could be like, well, yeah, people do swear when things get more heated in their surroundings.
Yeah.
But that is other than that, though, I think there were stylistic shifts between the two sections, and I kind of want to go back to what I was saying about the naturalistic writing style and how, like, it's not sufficient. Like I always compare. Scott's probably laughing because I brought this up like 2 different times, but like Neil Stephenson is one of my favorite writers, and there's this section in one of his books where he spends like 2 or 3 pages describing how this character likes their breakfast cereal and like how he gets the milk out of the freezer when it's just on the verge of freezing, and like this ridiculous detail, and it's sort of absurd, but also you're just loving reading it because he's written it like so lovingly and floridly, and no one would ever be like, oh, I wish he wouldn't include this boring stuff about the cereal, because no, that's not what the book's about. That has nothing to do with what the book's about, but it's part of bringing you into the world and making you sort of enjoy the reading experience. And yeah, and I think I wasn't enjoying the reading experience because of how the writing was done, I think, in this book.
Yeah, I think that's... I didn't finish this book until Saturday, and it wasn't because I waited till the last minute to read it. I just kept picking it up and putting it down again after a chapter or so, because I just wasn't engaging with it anymore, which is a far cry from the first 3 sections, because I did wait to the last minute to read those, and I read them basically nonstop over the course of a day because I was really interested in where it was going. But it is very stylistically, it's a big change. One of the other things that I thought was weird was they depicted Lucas as this character who was a young person, but definitely an adult. And I don't know if either of you noticed this, when we jumped into his head and got to see things from his point of view, he was depicted very childishly. He acted like a little kid.
He seemed very weak to me.
Yeah.
Like he just didn't, and that's why, if we want to go into the question of him being tempted to side with Bernard.
Yeah, that's a good segue, because that was one of our questions.
He just, I believe that he could, because he just seemed to have no spine, and he didn't seem to have any strong beliefs. Like, the only thing that he had holding him up was Juliet, because she's a much more stronger, assertive character that knows right and wrong, and he's just kind of weak.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's even the specific scene where his mother comes to visit him, and it's almost like that's explicitly there to show that he's sort of been pushed around his whole life by his mother.
Yeah, that's true.
That's how I read that scene.
But that, to me, and maybe it's just because we were seeing him from the point of view of a girl that liked him or something, but he was never depicted that way. Like, we first meet him, and he's this interesting guy sitting there trying to stare at stars, and he seems deep and soulful, and that's not the character that he is when we actually get his point of view at all.
Yeah.
Which is sort of, that in itself isn't a problem to me. Like, I kind of liked that, actually. I kind of liked being like, oh, this character is actually highly flawed, and you could even argue that he's putting up sort of a deceptive front. Maybe not intentionally deceptive, but definitely a facade. Mm-hmm. And this is going to backfire on Jules, because she thinks that he's this, like you said, this soulful guy who's going to be, of course he's going to be on her side, because he looks out at the stars, and so he's definitely has the heart of a poet. But actually he's pretty weak-willed and could very easily be pushed over.
Yeah. So let's talk about Bernard, because a lot of these questions are Bernard based, and I think because he's the closest to the book got to being a really, really interesting character to me. But I think they didn't pull it off. So the question here is, how did your opinion of Bernard change over the course of the novel? It did it? I mean, Matt, did your opinion of him change? I think probably yes, but
yeah, I actually felt sorry for him by the end, particularly how he went out. I thought that he had actually been put into a position where he had very few options. He couldn't just suddenly become a good guy, because the whole structure, like he wasn't in charge of anything, is sort of what was revealed. He's just as much a pawn of anyone else, and from his point of view, and I think accurately, if he messed up in his job, then the whole silo would just be murdered en masse. So very understandable sort of why he made the decisions he did. I mean, he's still I guess he's still a bad guy. I think he is still a bad guy, but he's a lot more understandable. And basically lynching him, which is what they did at the end, felt like a really weird way to end this book.
Yeah, that was so strange to me, because I felt like he was set up to be a bad guy in the first half, but then the second half of the book seemed almost to flip-flop on whether they wanted us to sympathize with him, to paint him in more detailed light, or to just call him a bad guy. Because on the one hand, like, the book tries to get you to understand his point of view, where he's just doing his job. He's not in control. But then on the other, I mean, he's keeping Lucas locked up. He seems like he's going insane. But the death at the end, and Cyndee, I mean, let me know if you agree with this, but it seemed like it spent 200 pages trying to get us to understand who this guy is, and then kills him off like just an evil villain, like without any redemption or anything.
Yeah, it was weird. I wasn't expecting that. I know it was a twist to like confuse the reader, and it conveniently ties everything up, because now that he's gone, they can do whatever they want, basically, because he's the only one that knows anything. So that's part of what I wanted to go into with him as well. I definitely thought he was being set up as a villain, and when you see that his motivations are actually good, he definitely becomes more sympathetic. You still don't like him because he still, kills people just for questioning him, but if he thinks the only alternative is chaos and everyone dying, it makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, it's his motivation is at its core good if you understand what he thinks he needs to do. But he also just seems to revel in it so much that that's when he becomes the bad guy.
Yeah.
And I think it would have been a lot more interesting, like Matt, you were touching on earlier, having Lucas actually be tempted by this guy, which he kind of seemed like he was, but it was very easy to say no when they're painting this guy with the villain paintbrush that, like, are you ever going to side with the guy that keeps you locked in a little hole in the ground for months at a time and, like, is trying to control you 100% completely? Like, it wanted us to see the temptation, but his choice was always pretty obvious to me. And then at the end, it didn't even let him make the choice by just having Bernard say, "Oh, we've got to kill you now."
Yeah, because you've been mildly questioning me. Yeah.
Yeah, to me, what would have been really interesting is if Jules finds her way back to the silo in the end, gets in, and finds that Bernard's not even the one in charge anymore. It's Lucas. And then the conflict is between these two former allies that are now opposing each other.
Yeah, definitely. Because the thing is, like, there are a couple of scenes where it's basically just dialogue between Bernard and Lucas, and Bernard makes a really good case, and I don't think anyone ever makes a verbal case against him. The case against him is sort of implicitly just this, hoorah humanity, democracy, vague thing of like, well, he's bad because people deserve the right to self-determination. But it's like, well, yeah, they deserve the right to self-determination. But if someone has a kill switch over everyone, and the only way to keep the kill switch at bay is to do questionable things, I'm not saying that it's right to do questionable things. I'm saying no one really engages with that argument.
Yeah, and I think that their error was they made life in the silo seem relatively happy. Mm-hmm. So, like, the only the thing that's supporting Bernard's argument is this ridiculous insurrection that's happening. So, like, under his system, people were relatively happy, things were stable, things were working correctly. Under the other system where people know the truth, people are creating guns and storming one of the sections. So it's like, being on his side, it seems right. Like, I'm of the opinion, and this actually ties into one of the questions we got. Do you agree with Juliet that full disclosure and honesty is better, or that hiding the truth from people for the greater good? I mean, one thing, what is your opinion? And the other is, what do you think the book kind of says?
Yeah.
Well, I think the book is on the side of democracy. I mean, I don't know. I'll have to read the sequel to see what happens. But I think that's kind of a assumed shared value of the audience because of, what country we come from. And I kind of agree with that because, I mean, the problem is not just the people found out the truth. The problem is the people found out that they had been lied to this whole time, and that IT was purposely killing people. And they didn't understand the reasoning because they didn't have the whole story. And I feel like if they were giving people all of the information, and maybe they would understand better. Maybe they would understand why things have to be a certain way and what the risks are. I don't really see the point of sending people outside to die. It's not necessary. It doesn't really seem to accomplish anything. I mean, I guess if that's the only way to punish people, but they can clean the lenses by making better suits and then letting people back in, obviously. So
it's funny because as we're talking about this, I realized that the episode of the 100 I just watched before this podcast deals with this same kind of theme, full disclosure versus hiding the truth from people in the name of protecting them, and it does it so much better than this book does it, because it actually showed, like, it sides with one side and then shows you the benefit of that way. So the truth is revealed to the people, and people react well to it, and they it allows them to bond and brings out the best in mankind. But this book never really shows us that. It's almost democracy is right because we as the audience are pro-democracy, so that has to be the best way.
Yeah,
But the book doesn't ever really say why that's good in the context of this world.
Yeah, or why these characters would think that, for that matter. Like,
right.
These aren't Americans who suddenly found themselves in a silo. These are people who've lived in this authoritarian environment their entire lives. They're basically like serfs. Why would they even be having these revolutionary thoughts?
Yeah. So moving into the, building on that, one of our questions is, what do you think of Lucas and Bernard's immediate identification with the people who had destroyed the world? So we did this instead of our ancestors did this. Matt, did you find that believable, or?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because it immediately made me think of how we use language in our society, and we'll say, like, anything from we bombed this country when you're talking with a coworker, and clearly neither of you actually bombed a country. What you mean is the nation that you're a citizen of and who makes decisions that have nothing to do with you bomb that country with its military. And we also say things like, we took the land from the Native Americans, which is a more similar usage to the one that they're using here when they say we killed the world, because it's like, well, your ancestors did it. And so the interesting part to me was that these characters in this book sort of immediately assume that culpability, even though they're the victims of that decision, because they're the ones who've been living for generations in suffering because of whoever it was who did this. So it's just weird to me. It's weird to me that the first thing that they would think is we did this, instead of some people did this and then they hid some people away to survive and we're their descendants.
Yeah. It shows a level of taking responsibility for something that I'm not used to seeing in the actual real world. That's an interesting point. Okay, so this is actually a really good question. The first book we did in our secret was The Martian, and when Matt and I talked about it, we talked about what they chose to cut and why. If they were making a movie for Wool, what do you think they would cut? What do you think they would emphasize? How do you think they would change the story to adapt it into movie form? Cyndee, what do you think?
Well, unfortunately, being a movie, they'd have to focus more on the uprising, I think, and there would be more action scenes. I think a lot of what they would take out would be the beginning, because it's not the characters that are in most of the books. So the part with Holston, they definitely do it, but it would be like 10 minutes. And then the part with the mayor, I think, would be much shorter, because it's just this slow traveling through the silo and not a lot of action. So I definitely think they would cut that a lot. And I think it would focus a lot on the battles and what happens to Juliet.
Yeah. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Cyndee that they're going to, basically try to remake Snowpiercer. A lot more battles, and then I was thinking they're probably going to amp up the sort of horror elements where she's sneaking around the dead, darkened silo. Because when I was reading that part, I was like, man, this should be terrifying, and I bet it would be terrifying if it was a movie.
I think if I were adapting this, I think I would do the Holston part as like a 10-minute cold open. And then I'd probably never do stuff from the mayor's point of view. I'd probably cut right to Juliet after that and like have just like the mayor approaching her to be the replacement sheriff is kind of the first event in the movie, and go from there. I wonder, like, it's such a weird narrative choice to take the main character of the book out of the central conflict of the story. So I wonder if they were adapting the movie, if they would change that, or they would have two protagonists. Because I feel like the Silo 17 is so central to what happens to the character, but also not to the overall plot, really. So really, all that happens in 17 is she learns that there's another Silo, like that's really it, and that they're all dead. Like, it's just an example of what can go wrong. So she kind of learns why Uprising is bad, but I don't know. And I think this would be really difficult to adapt. Actually, I think they would have to make a lot of changes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if y'all are aware that they're actually in some stage of making a movie of this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I looked it up.
Are there any names attached?
Well, Ridley Scott bought the rights. I don't know if he's directing it though. God. He's producing.
Oh my god.
And the screenplay is supposedly being adapted by Nicole Perlman, who was co-writer of Guardians of the Galaxy.
Well, that's promising. That was a pretty good movie.
Yeah, that was surprisingly good.
I mean, I think it's I think it's adaptable. I mean, I think I'm now very curious to see that movie when it comes out, because I'm wondering if like with The Martian, they take out the stuff that I didn't really like and make a really good film. It definitely has that potential.
Yeah, the word that I used, or the word that I read, was that they're rewriting the story to make it into a movie, not that they're just making a screenplay of it, which sounds to me like a good decision.
I would honestly not be surprised if they cut out her getting banished entirely and just make her one of the leaders of the uprising.
That would be terrible.
Would it, though?
Yes. Because I thought exploring the Dead Silo was cool.
I mean, it was cool, but it didn't matter.
It did matter because it showed exactly what can go wrong.
Yeah, I don't know.
And I don't know, it kind of gave you this hope that the silos were going to be joined together at some point.
I don't know how they do it without... I mean, she has to be involved. If she's the main character of the movie, she has to be involved in the main conflict. Like, she can't be completely divorced from it. So if they're going to kick her out of the silo, they need a way to get her back in sooner, or they need to change at what time she gets back in. Like, unless they spend equal time in the movie building up one of these, that Knox character or whatever, to make them a relatable, interesting character. I don't know. But I think it could be interesting. We'll see. We're running short on time here, but one kind of overall question that we got. Many books have come out recently about a dystopian society that came after some kind of collapse. Cyndee, do you feel the genre is overdone a little? There are a lot of books about this kind of thing. Dystopian societies are actually really big, not just in books. Like Walking Dead is the most popular show. We love end of the world stuff.
Yeah, it's surprising to me because I've liked this kind of thing for a long time and then suddenly became popular. Like, I remember reading this book as a kid about a dystopian society, and I just got sucked in by that book. I loved it. It was the first book I think I ever read about this topic, and I've been seeking out books like that, and then all of a sudden they're everywhere, and I'm starting to get tired of it because that's all you see.
Yeah, I think I'm a little tired of it too. I mean, I've recently gotten back into the Walking Dead show, and I like it a lot. But I mean, I think there's only so many different things you can do within the genre. I think this is an interesting kind of twist on it. I haven't seen something quite like this before specifically. It's kind of like the Fallout video game if people never got to leave the vault, which wouldn't make a very good game, but interesting story. I think it's going to fizzle out. I think a lot of it has to do with, our present day, fear of the end of the world, and but both kind of our fear of it and like our interest in a world where our rules are gone and it's a different kind of experience kind of excites us.
Yeah.
But I don't know how this book fits into that, because there's a lot of strict, rigid laws and stuff in this. But
I think there is an element of our culture, like we realize that the world is going bad in a lot of ways. Like we're really destroying the planet, and it could lead to some really bad things. And I think there is a kind of a sense of that and what's going to happen if we continue on this path. So I think that's one reason why people are interested in. I also, one of the things I like about it that I find interesting is what it shows, like the core of humanity. What is humanity really like under different kinds of circumstances? And what does humanity become when the society that we all know crumbles away? And this book, like you said, doesn't explore that as much because they're just in another more rigid society.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the next book is going to be about what's the society going to become now that the old one's been toppled.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of our discussion points was that they are really interested in seeing what happens next. I'm not sure if I'm really pumped about grabbing the next book in the series and seeing what happens. I might wait and see what some other people think before I dive into it. But I think another thing another reason maybe dystopian type stories are so popular is our world is really complicated now, and we have such complicated problems with no real easy solution. I mean, you look at the stuff we're dealing with right now with ISIS over this past weekend, and there's no really easy solution to how to stop terrible stuff like that from happening. And in a dystopian future where society has collapsed, the problems are a lot easier to deal with, and it's mostly just survival, and it's a lot less complicated of a life. So I think we kind of enjoy that. We like the idea of stories told in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I read a book earlier this year called Station 11, which is a really good book. It's not really dystopian. I mean, it's post-apocalyptical. It's about after a disease wipes out the planet,
Mm-hmm.
and there's, different survivors that we look at, and they're all connected to this one actor, which is interesting structurally. But, and one of the sections that really spoke to me was there were a bunch of people that were stranded in an airport, and for some reason no one was infected in this airport, so they just kind of went under quarantine, and they formed their own society. And one of the characters was like a corporate person who did 360 evaluations and really felt like his life was meaningless, and suddenly being down to the essentials of survival and making authentic relationships with people with a common cause, that gave him a sense of meaning and purpose in his life that he didn't have before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I kind of want to check that out now.
Yeah, that sounds cool. I sort of think there are two classes of the dystopian or post-apocalyptic or whatever. I think in one case, the author doesn't want to have to be bogged down by the restraints of reality. They don't want to have to talk about world politics, but they want to talk about big themes and human institutions. So they just say like, okay, there was a huge disaster, everything is disrupted and now unrecognizable to you, and so I don't have to worry about whether this is like a plausible evolution of the current state of things. So it's almost like a form of fantasy. It's almost like a branch of the fantasy genre, because it doesn't necessarily have anything magical in it, but it's, I think Hunger Games fits that, because it's like they actually do have these unbelievable, genetically mutated monsters and things like that.
Right.
And then the other class of dystopian stuff is actually interested in sort of extrapolating current trends, instead of just saying like, oh yeah, there was some kind of disaster. It's more like, I don't know, I think Fahrenheit 451 and maybe 1984 perhaps fall along this, where you can sort of see how these are extrapolations of the author is saying like, this is what's going to happen if we don't watch ourselves. And this is in both of those books they have characters monologue about exactly why that is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So which do you think this would fall under? I mean, I think kind of both, right? I think there's some indication of future United States realizes that they're losing power and decides that we're going to blow up the whole world, but keep our people alive in these silos.
Yeah, I didn't really buy that whole idea, but
yeah.
That seems like a very interesting, like, I mean, I know our country has done a lot of messed up things, but that seems kind of stupid.
Yeah, really stupid.
I think it probably falls more under the prior category, because they're just like, I mean, really it doesn't, I mean, yeah, there was that thing where they were like, yeah, it was the United States that did this apparently, but you could have just cut out like 3 sentences and just had them be like, we don't know where we came from exactly.
Right.
And it would have just been like, yeah, I mean, really any, if you're making the argument, then it could be any human civilization could potentially make the decision of saying like, okay, our way of life is at risk to the extent that we're willing to just wipe out the world just to preserve some vestige of our way of life specifically. Or at least that's, the nightmare scenario.
Well, and did you think that the fact that we did this to ourselves really mattered to the overall plot? Like that was the turn that Lucas kind of hinged on once he learned that, is when he definitely said, no, I can't side with Bernard. But I mean, it didn't seem like that mattered thematically to the rest of the story. It was the truth about the fact that they were being kept in there and controlled for a reason. That was the big truth reveal, not that, hey, we did this. Like, that didn't seem to matter.
I don't know. I think it made him lose trust in the people that created all these rules.
Yeah, that's
because they obviously didn't know what the hell they were doing.
Now that you mention that, I do think it's funny that these people were writing all these rules probably back at, I mean, I assume this book was written back right when they were about to blow everything up, but they already decided that this cleaning with it was a method of control, which shows an amount of foresight that's incredible. That they basically were going to define this, how this whole society would work before it even happened.
I don't know if it changed over time or what. You get the sense that Silo 1 has more authority than the others, so I don't know if they came up with new rules as they went along. I don't know.
So because I decided that I had no interest in reading the other books in this series, I read roughly what those other books are about.
Don't tell me what's going to happen.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to read them.
Okay, fine. I was going to.
I mean, can you do like general idea, like what? Don't give away the story, but what it focuses on.
Not if I don't want to spoil.
Okay.
I mean, basically, Silo 1 is completely different. It's not like the other silos at all. I'll just say that.
Okay. Well, now I kind of want to read it.
No, just look it up and then read what I'm.
Is the Wikipedia article enough to get?
Probably not. I went to the subreddit on the wool, r/wool.
Gotcha. Does this book have a big following? Am I trashing on a very popular book?
I don't think so. No, I mean,
I don't think it's that popular because I couldn't even find the other 2 books at my library. I'm gonna have to go to Carrollton to get them.
I mean, Worm, which is sort of a similar artifact to this story. Has
which
like
Matt wrote a review on.
Which I wrote a review on, and which I love. Has like 1,000 times more fans than this does, and it's funny to me that they're making this into a movie. And well, you can't really make Worm into a movie because Worm is like twice as long as Song of Ice and Fire. But
isn't Worm like only online?
Yeah. And the author's sort of trying to get it like published, so that's why it's hard to publish because it's so enormous, or it's hard to find a publisher who will be like, sure, let me take this thing you've already given away for free and then spend a lot of money binding it.
Yeah. So I guess to conclude on this, to wrap it all together, Cyndee, would you recommend this book to a friend?
It's a hard question. I'd recommend it with reservations. It's not the greatest book ever, but it was entertaining. I'd probably give it 3 out of 5 stars.
Okay. Matt?
Probably not. I had to think about this for a while because there were definitely parts that I enjoyed. But overall, I don't think I walked away from it with any particularly powerful nuggets of insight or entertainment value.
Yeah.
So sometimes a book will win you over with just like a single little insight that's buried in there somewhere, and that makes it enough for you to say like, okay, yeah, I would recommend this. But
yeah,
not unfortunately not this one.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think I was kind of on the fence about it, and then I picked up another book on Saturday and started reading it, and fell in love with it, and it got me thinking how many other books out there that I would recommend over this. And unless you've read almost every single good book in the world, I think there's so many other books I'd rather people read over this. So I'd probably say no. I think we've been really critical, and I think that's okay. I think the book has a lot of problems. I think I didn't hate it though. Overall, I for the most part enjoyed my experience. I really did like the first 3 sections a lot. I think it set up a very interesting, different kind of world.
Yeah, I did too.
I just think it didn't pay off on it.
Yeah,
I feel like this is a common problem where authors come up with a great idea and they set it up and then they don't know what to do with it.
Yep.
A lot of endings are really problematic.
I think that the Hunger Games author did that.
Yeah, that's just what I was thinking of. Like when she was writing about this small thing, the Hunger Games, it was great. But when she tries to write about this big thing, like this whole revolution, and it just kind of falls apart, and it's really messy.
Yeah, fortunately, the movies have done an amazing job.
Yeah, I thought The Mockingjay Part 1 was good, and hopefully Part 2 will fix some of the problems with the book.
I will let you know next week. I'm seeing it Saturday morning.
Saturday morning?
Yeah, $6 tickets. Saturday at 10, I think. Okay,
right.
I waited too long and the Friday night seats were sold out. So
I would say that I would love to read the final draft of Wool.
That's probably the best comment. And I wonder, it makes me curious with these internet published books, if they do make edits from the internet published version to the one that actually gets bound. Like if this book were read is different from the original that was published online drastically.
Yeah, I don't know. I know I'm pretty sure. I don't know. I have no idea, honestly. I suspect not drastically, but that's just
if anyone out there that's listening has read both and knows if they're different, let us know in the comments. I'd be very interested to know that. But all right, this was a really good discussion. I enjoyed doing this, even if I didn't love the book. We're gonna do this again for another book in the coming future. I think it went overall really well. I don't know what you guys think. If there are any recommendations for changing the format or changing up how we do this, feel free to reach out to us and let us know. But I'm happy with our book club. So thanks, guys.
Well, thank you, Scott.
So
Thank you.
so Matt, where can we find you on the internet?
Oh, I reside at Twitter at MORIDINAMAEL. I have to spell it out in my head every time.
And is there anything that you've been working on that's coming up that you want to plug?
No, my fiction story is going very well, but you're not going to see that for like months and months.
I look forward to editing that.
Yeah.
You
should.
Once you bundle it all together.
Yeah, I should mention that it makes me feel really weird, like really kind of criticizing a web serial like Wool while I'm sort of writing what I plan to be a web serial, because I just know that some jerk, essentially analogous to me, is going to tear it apart in his podcast someday.
But you know that means that your book was good enough to be read by someone who's going to tear it apart on a podcast.
That's true.
You know. All right, Cyndee, we can't find you on the internet because you're elusive and mysterious.
Yeah,
but
that's it.
Do you have anything you plan on writing for us? Anything you want to plug?
No. Really busy right now.
Fine. I can be found at ScottDaly85 on Twitter. It's DALY. Also at Daly Planet Films is our Twitter, and also all of our writing can be found at www.dalyplanetfilms.com. When Cyndee decides to write something else for us, that'll be there too. Stuff you can look forward to me on Thursday. I'm going to publish a holiday movie list of my top 10 movies I'm looking forward to for the rest of this year. So look out for that. There's going to be some really great movies in there. I'm excited about that one. And hopefully on Friday, I'm going to publish this new thing I've been working on, where I'm calling it Anatomy of a Scene, where I kind of go through one of my favorite scenes in one of my favorite movies and talk about exactly why it's great. Talk about specifics of the camera work, the blocking, and the pacing of the scene, and why it all is amazing. Look out for that soon. Maybe this week, maybe next week. But our podcast next week, we are going to talk about Rocky, because Creed is coming out on Wednesday. So when this podcast comes up, I will already have seen Creed, which I'm so excited about. So if you like Rocky, you should listen next week, because it's my favorite movie of all time, and anyone who disagrees is stupid. But that's all we have for you guys this week. So we'll see you next week.